Welcome to Real and Deep Love Stories, a place where emotions speak louder than words, and where every heartbeat tells a truth the world often hides. Tonight's story, She Kisses My Boss, isn't just about forbidden attraction. It's about the kind of love that challenges boundaries, defies silence, and teaches that even in the most complicated places, hearts find their truth. From quiet glances across an office to the kiss that changed everything. From the struggle between love and reputation to the realization of a connection that can't be denied, this is a journey of passion, restraint, and the courage to feel deeply. So sit back, open your heart, and let the story remind you that sometimes the most powerful love isn't shouted to the world, it's whispered in the moments no one sees. The office was always quiet in the mornings. The hum of the air conditioner, the distant tapping of keys, and the faint aroma of coffee mixed with the tension of unsaid words. Every day began the same way, eyes meeting across the room, pretending not to notice, pretending that the quick flutter in the chest was nothing more than a morning rush. But something lingered in that space between glances, something alive, fragile, and dangerous. He always arrived a little later than everyone else. The door would open. The scent of his cologne would drift in first, subtle yet commanding, and suddenly the room felt smaller. The air changed, softer yet charged, as though every wall leaned closer to listen. Conversations paused for a heartbeat, then resumed with forced normalcy. Eyes would lift for a moment, then quickly return to screens. And yet, that one silent gaze from him said more than 1,000 words could ever dare. There were rules in that plaisance, spoken, invisible, but strong enough to bind. Professional boundaries, codes of conduct, expectations. Everyone knew them, everyone followed them. And yet, when his voice filled the room, steady and low, it carried a warmth that cracked those walls without anyone realizing. Every instruction sounded less like a command and more like an invitation to step closer to something unexplainable. Meetings became the highlight of the day. Not for the projects or presentations, but for the rare moments when his attention would fall, for even a second with unguarded intensity. A question asked, an answer given, and suddenly the air would shift. There was something in his eyes, focus, admiration, curiosity, maybe all at once. Every word exchanged was coated with restraint, but underneath it pulsed something raw and growing. Sometimes, when the office thinned out in the late hours, that quiet turned into something intimate. The soft rhythm of the clock, the distant city noise outside the glass walls, and the faint rustle of papers being gathered became the only sounds. Those moments stretched time. One look, one almost smile, one shared silence held entire conversations that could never be spoken aloud. It wasn't planned. It just happened, as if destiny had chosen the most inconvenient place to play its cruelest trick. Every passing day made it harder to pretend. The mind knew better, but the heart ignored the rules. The smallest things became unbearable. The brush of fingers while passing documents, the subtle shift in his tone when addressing directly, the way his laughter softened when the room was nearly empty. It was never about the grand gestures, never about words. It was in the details, in everything that went unsaid. There were moments of fear, too. Fear of being seen, fear of being misunderstood, fear of wanting something forbidden. Yet that fear only made the connection deeper. It added an ache that refused to fade, a longing that lingered even in the simplest of interactions. It wasn't just attraction. It was something far more complicated. A recognition of souls that had met before in some other lifetime, perhaps. A pull that logic could not tame. Nights became restless. Thoughts played out in endless loops, replaying every small moment from the day. The way his eyes lingered a second too long, the way he paused before turning away. Each memory burned with quiet intensity. The mind argued, reasoned, tried to dismiss it all as illusion, but the heart whispered otherwise. Something real had taken root quietly beneath layers of formality and silence. The world outside would never understand. To others, it would seem ordinary. Two people working together, nothing more. But within that ordinary setting lived something extraordinary. A bond invisible yet undeniable, fragile yet strong enough to shift the ground beneath every step. There was beauty in that restraint, in loving someone with all the words locked behind closed lips. It was the kind of love that didn't need to be declared to exist. It simply was. One evening, the rain began to fall, heavy and unrelenting. Most of the office had already left. The dim lights reflected on the wet glass, blurring the city's colors into soft streaks. The sound of rain filled the silence, comforting yet lonely. There was no need for conversation. Just presence, just breathing the same air, standing close enough to feel each other's heartbeat without ever touching. The tension that had lived between them for so long began to shimmer like electricity. The rain outside seemed to echo the storm within. Time stretched until it no longer felt real. Every second carried the weight of everything unsaid. Eyes met again, holding what words couldn't bear to express. In that gaze was everything: longing, fear, love, surrender. And yet still no line was crossed. Only silence spoke, powerful and pure. Sometimes love isn't in the act itself, but in the restraint it demands. Sometimes it's in the pain of not reaching out, in the strength it takes to feel everything and say nothing. Days passed, seasons changed, and the world kept moving, unaware of the quiet fire that burned behind polite smiles and professional gestures. The connection never faded. It simply learned to exist within boundaries, to breathe in the spaces between moments. There were times when paths drifted apart, when distance became necessary, but even then, a part of that connection remained, soft, steady, eternal. It's strange how love can live in silence, how it can thrive without touch, how two souls can find each other in the most unlikely of places and still carry that spark through years of pretending. It doesn't fade, it transforms. It becomes something deeper, an understanding, a memory, a constant hum beneath life's noise. The world may never know what truly existed between them, but in quiet corners of the heart, that story still plays softly, endless and unbroken. And maybe that's where real love belongs, not in grand declarations or dramatic endings, but in those fleeting, unspoken moments where everything is felt, yet nothing is said. The night had that kind of stillness that makes every heartbeat sound louder. The office was quiet, the lights dimmed to a golden hue that softened everything it touched. The air carried the faint scent of rain from earlier, mixing with the warmth of coffee gone cold. It was supposed to be another late evening, another project stretched past the point of exhaustion. Another night pretending that the tension filling the room was just fatigue. But something was different. Something had shifted. Every word exchanged carried a tremor. The conversation danced between safe topics, deadlines, meetings, schedules. But beneath each sentence ran a quiet current of truth neither dared to name. The closeness felt unbearable, yet neither moved away. It wasn't planned, it wasn't sought. It was just there, waiting for one small moment of weakness to break everything open. The silence that fell afterward wasn't awkward. It was alive. Eyes met, searching, questioning, daring. Time seemed to hold its breath. There was no logic left in that space, no rules, no reason strong enough to stand against what was pulling them together. One step closer felt like crossing a line drawn by the world, but it also felt like coming home after a lifetime of pretending. It happened so slowly it almost felt unreal. A glance, a breath, the faintest brush of fingers when passing a file that didn't need to be passed. Skin touched skin, and the world fell away. The sound of paper sliding from a desk was the only witness to the moment everything changed. When lips finally met, it wasn't the way the mind had imagined in restless nights. It was deeper, heavier, almost painful in its honesty. It wasn't just desire, it was release. Every ounce of restraint, every buried feeling, every unspoken truth poured into that single, trembling moment. Time stopped. The hum of the computer faded, the ticking clock disappeared. The entire universe narrowed to the soft press of warmth and the rush of breath between them. It wasn't wild or hurried. It was delicate, almost reverent, as if both knew the weight of what they were doing. It wasn't just a kiss, it was confession, the kind that strips away pretense and leaves only truth behind. It was years of longing condensed into seconds, every heartbeat echoing the same thought. This was never supposed to happen, and yet it always was. Hands lingered for a fraction too long, and in that touch lived the ache of all the times they had pretended not to feel. Every inch of space between them dissolved into something indescribable, something neither had words for but both had known too long. The world outside that room still existed, full of eyes and judgments and rules, but in that suspended moment none of it mattered. The only reality was the taste of surrender. The mind tried to resist, to remind that this was wrong, but the heart had already decided. Sometimes love hides behind logic until it can't anymore. Sometimes it breaks through in the quietest ways. In the way someone looks at you when they think you're not watching, or the way their voice softens when saying your name. This kiss was all those moments finally finding their voice. When it ended, the silence was different. Heavy, full. It wasn't guilt that filled the air, it was awe. A quiet understanding that nothing could return to what it was. There was no taking it back, no pretending it hadn't happened. The taste of it lingered, not just on lips, but deep inside where emotions live long after they're denied. Eyes met again, searching for the right thing to say, but there was nothing. Words would have ruined it, diminished it. So silence spoke instead, saying everything that needed to be said. There was fear, yes, fear of what this meant, of what would come next. But beneath it, there was peace too. Because for the first time, the truth had been touched, felt, lived. Days after, the world tried to return to normal. Meetings resumed, voices carried, laughter echoed through corridors. But beneath it all, something had changed. Every time they passed each other, every shared glance carried that memory. It wasn't something that could be erased. It lived in the small pauses, in the way air seemed thicker when they were near. The kiss had marked everything. Work, routine, even silence. Sometimes it was almost unbearable, that knowledge of what had been felt. The longing didn't fade, it deepened. The heart no longer pretended not to know. Every reminder, a phrase, a smile, a reflection caught unexpectedly, brought back that moment as vivid as the night it happened. And yet, strangely, there was no regret. Only the quiet ache of something too real to deny. There were moments afterward when they both tried to rebuild walls. Conversations became polite again, smiles more guarded. But it was futile. Once a soul has been seen that deeply, no distance can truly separate it. The body can move on, the mind can reason, but the heart remembers everything. There was beauty in that pain, the kind that teaches, the kind that transforms. That kiss had not been a mistake. It had been a mirror. It showed everything that had been hidden, everything that made them human, vulnerable, alive. It was the moment that stripped away all the masks both had worn for too long. Nights felt lonelier after that. The bed felt too cold, the world too loud. Every memory of that kiss replayed not for pleasure, but for meaning, because it wasn't about wanting more. It was about realizing what had already been there all along. That connection didn't begin with the kiss. It was only revealed by it. Love isn't always about possession. Sometimes it's about understanding something sacred and letting it exist, even if it can't be named. That kiss didn't demand promises or explanations. It simply asked to be remembered, for what it was, for what it revealed. It was the truth breaking through years of silence, a moment that didn't just change everything, but defined everything. And long after the world had moved on, long after the voices of reason had drowned out the echoes of that night, something inside still carried it. The warmth, the trembling, the certainty that for one brief, perfect moment, everything made sense. Because sometimes a single kiss holds an entire lifetime. The days that followed carried a quiet heaviness, like the air before a storm that refuses to break. Everything looked the same office walls, the same people, the same routines, but nothing truly was. Beneath every glance, every word, every breath, the memory of what had happened lived on. It was impossible to hide from something that had already taken root inside. The kiss had opened a door that could never be closed again, and behind it lay a truth too deep to deny, yet too dangerous to reveal. Every morning began with the same silent battle and nothing had changed when everything had. The sound of his voice during meetings carried a weight that no one else could hear. Every professional word spoken was laced with the memory of that night, of the warmth, of the tremor in the air that had tied two lives together in a way the world would never accept. He looked the same, spoke the same, but there was a new gentleness in the way his eyes lingered, as if trying to apologize for something neither could regret. It should have been easier to let go. The sensible thing to do would have been to draw boundaries, to turn away, to bury the memory beneath the layers of responsibility and reputation. But love doesn't understand rules, and hearts don't follow logic. Every attempt at distance only deepened the ache. Every act of restraint only reminded that what existed between them was not a mistake. It was something real, something rare, something forbidden yet painfully beautiful. Outside that room, the world was waiting with its sharp eyes and louder opinions. Reputation, image, position. Those were the currencies that mattered. Love had no place in that equation. There was fear in every step, in every shared glance, in every accidental touch. A single rumor could destroy everything: his respect, the life carefully built over years, the fragile dignity that kept everything together. And yet, the heart refused to listen. It kept returning to him over and over again, in memories, in dreams, in the quiet moments when the soul dared to remember. There were days filled with guilt. Guilt for feeling too much, for wanting what couldn't be claimed, for being the reason behind sleepless nights and restless silence. And yet, intertwined with that guilt was longing, pure, relentless, and unyielding. It was the kind of longing that didn't fade with distance or time, the kind that lived quietly, like a heartbeat beneath calm skin, impossible to silence. Sometimes when the office emptied and the lights dimmed, there were moments when eyes met across the quiet space and everything else disappeared. No words were needed. The silence carried everything: love, regret, desire, fear. Every second felt stolen, borrowed from a world that didn't belong to them. The sweetness of those moments was laced with pain, because even in their most honest connection, they knew it could never belong to daylight. Every choice came with a consequence. To protect his reputation meant denying what the heart already knew. To surrender to love meant risking everything that made him who he was. The weight of that truth pressed down harder each day. The smallest gestures, holding the door, brushing past in the hallway, and almosts, miles shared in passing, became unbearable reminders of everything that couldn't be spoken aloud. People around began to notice the tension, though they couldn't name it. Questions hung in the air, light but sharp. Whispers formed in corners. Every laugh shared felt too loud, every accidental glance too long. The fear of being discovered was constant, yet it couldn't overpower the pull that drew them together again and again. Love had become a quiet rebellion, fought in the smallest of ways, hidden beneath the weight of reputation and expectation. He carried the burden in silence, just as she did. Sometimes his eyes betrayed exhaustion, not of the body, but of the soul. The struggle between duty and desire left him torn in ways that words could never capture. There were moments when he tried to create distance, to retreat into the safety of professionalism, but love doesn't understand retreat. It lingers in the spaces logic cannot reach. The world outside measured worth by appearance, by control, by reputation. But inside those stolen moments, something truer existed. A love unmeasured by status, unshaken by time, though shadowed by fear. It wasn't about possession or pride. It was about the ache of two people who found each other when they shouldn't have, and who couldn't let go even when they tried. There were nights when the city lights blurred against the window, and thoughts spiraled quietly. Would it have been better if they had never met, if fate had kept their paths separate? The mind whispered yes, but the heart always said no, because even in its pain, that love had brought something sacred, a truth that only those who have loved in silence can understand. Sometimes love exists not to be lived fully, but to be remembered deeply. It teaches what connection truly means, what sacrifice feels like, what it is to love and still protect. The struggle between love and reputation became a rhythm, a push and pull that defined everything. It was a dance between desire and restraint, between truth and survival. And though neither could win without losing something, they kept moving within it, because not to love at all would have been the greater loss. In the quiet corners of the mind, where no one could judge or see, the heart replayed those moments again and again. The warmth of his presence, the sound of his laughter, the look in his eyes that said everything words never could. And though the world could never understand, that love lived on quietly, fiercely, beneath all the layers of what must never be revealed. Because sometimes the bravest thing love can do is stay hidden. There comes a point when time stops fighting what the heart already knows, when the noise of guilt, fear, and restraint quiets, and what remains is something pure, uncomplicated by rules or reputation. It happened gradually without warning. Somewhere between long silences and brief exchanges, something began to shift. The feeling that once lived in secrecy no longer felt like a crime. It became something sacred, something that didn't need to hide anymore, even if the world still wouldn't understand. There was a calm that followed the storm of wanting. The rush of forbidden moments had softened into something deeper, an understanding that what existed between them was more than longing. It was recognition. It was the meeting of two souls that had been searching, perhaps unknowingly, for one another. The connection was no longer about what couldn't be done or what mustn't be said. It was about what already was, what had always been there beneath the surface, waiting for acceptance. Each day no longer felt like a battle to resist. Instead, it became an act of quiet gratitude. Every look, every shared silence, every small kindness carried a weight that words couldn't hold. There was no need for promises or plans. Just being near was enough. Just knowing that somewhere in the same space existed another heartbeat that understood. That was everything. There were still moments of doubt, of course. The world outside didn't change, it never does. But something inside had. Fear had lost its power. Love had taken its place. It was no longer about hiding. It was about holding onto the truth of what had been found. The connection was no longer something to be ashamed of. It was something to protect. Something that had brought out the truest parts of both souls. The tenderness, the courage, the capacity to feel beyond reason. It wasn't about the thrill anymore. The fire that once burned with urgency had become something steady, like a candle that refused to go out no matter how strong the wind. It warmed rather than consumed. It illuminated the corners of life that had been dimmed by duty and loneliness. It made ordinary days feel extraordinary simply because they existed in the same shared reality. Sometimes the smallest gestures carried the most meaning. The briefest smile in passing, the light brush of hands that didn't linger but said everything. Even without touch, there was a presence that wrapped around every thought. There was peace in knowing that love didn't need to be loud to be real. It lived quietly, honestly, in moments no one else saw. In that quiet love, there was also forgiveness. Forgiveness for all the fears, for the times they had turned away, for the pain of pretending. There was no blame anymore, no anger at the world for making things difficult. Only acceptance that some loves are not meant to be simple, that sometimes the beauty lies in their very impossibility. He carried himself differently too. The guardedness in his eyes had softened. His words were still careful, but there was warmth beneath them that hadn't been there before. The love between them had taught both something profound, that connection isn't about ownership, it's about recognition. Seeing another person fully, without demand, without fear, and still choosing to care. Sometimes they spoke without speaking at all. A look across the room was enough to remind that love doesn't always need to shout its presence. It was there in the stillness, in the quiet strength of simply existing in each other's awareness. The world went on, busy and loud, but in those moments, everything felt still, as if time itself had stepped aside to make room for something eternal. There were no expectations anymore, no dreams of rewriting fate. The love they shared had already done what it needed to. It had changed them. It had shown that real connection isn't found in perfection or permanence, but in truth. It's in the way two people can meet in the middle of chaos and find peace simply in knowing they've been understood. Even on the days when distance grew between them, when life demanded space, the bond remained untouched. The connection lived beyond proximity, beyond words. It wasn't about having each other. It was about being part of each other in ways that couldn't be undone. The heart had found its mirror, and that reflection couldn't fade, no matter how far apart the bodies moved. There was a moment, quiet, unremarkable to anyone else, when everything became clear. The realization came not through passion, but through peace. Love had outgrown its boundaries. It wasn't something to chase or conceal anymore. It was something that simply existed, quietly anchoring the soul even in its absence. It wasn't about the kiss or the secrecy or the moments stolen from time. It was about the knowing that something true had been found in a world where so much is pretend. Sometimes love doesn't need an ending or a declaration. It doesn't need to be defined or explained. It only needs to be felt once, deeply enough to last a lifetime. And that kind of love changes everything, not through possession, but through understanding. It makes a person softer, wiser, more alive. It teaches that the heart's truth will always find a way to surface, even in the most complicated places. It's strange how something that began as forbidden could end up being the purest thing ever known. Love had stripped away the masks, the fear, the need to prove anything. What remained was simple, honest, human. It wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about real, and in that truth there was peace. Because even if the world could never know their story, it didn't matter. The connection had already written itself into their hearts, in ways that no distance, no silence, no passage of time could erase. Sometimes love's greatest proof is that it survives quietly where no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more real and deep love stories that speak to the soul. Every week, new emotions unfold, stories of love, loss, longing, and truth that remind us how deeply we're all connected. Until next time, hold on to what's real, cherish what's true, and remember even the quietest love can change everything.